They'd cut off your hand, gouge out your eyes, or even burn you alive. But here's the crazy part. These brutal punishments were actually the fairest thing anyone had ever seen. Hammurabi's code was the first system where rich and poor got the same justice. Tonight we're diving into the most savage yet fair laws in human history. And I promise you, after learning this story, you'll never look at our modern legal system the same way again. 4,000 years ago in Mesopotamia, the greatest revolution in human history went down. This wasn't fought with weapons, it was fought with words. 282 laws carved into stone tablets changed the world forever. These laws were so powerful that modern constitutions still draw inspiration from them. So effective that even the Roman Empire copied this system. So revolutionary that the scales of justice you see in courtrooms today trace back to this very moment. But this isn't just about laws, it's about one man's story. A king named Hammurabi who didn't just rule Babylon. He taught humanity what justice actually means. And he did it by creating a system that mixed brutality with mercy, harshness with fairness. Tonight I'm telling you his story. I won't just list Hammurabi's laws, we're taking a journey back in time. We'll walk those ancient streets, wait outside those courtrooms, and most importantly, uncover the deep philosophy behind those brutal but fair punishments. Our story kicks off in 1792 BC. Hammurabi was just 30 years old when his father Sin-Muballit died, and he took the throne. But what he found wasn't exactly what you'd picture from royal fantasies. Babylon was in complete chaos. Back then, Mesopotamia was split into tiny city-states. Larsa, Ishnuna, Mari, Assur, they were all at each other's throats. But the real problem wasn't these wars. The real problem was the injustice inside these cities. The powerful crushed the weak, and there was absolutely no system to stop it. Hammurabi had seen this as a kid. In his father's palace, he watched rich merchants scam poor farmers. One day, an old farmer came to the palace. His fields had been stolen by a wealthy noble. The farmer wanted justice, but all he was told was, "Don't mess with the powerful." This moment hit young Hammurabi hard. That night he asked his father, "Dad, why don't we speak up against injustice?" Sin-Muballit's answer summed up the whole mindset of the time. "Son, might makes right. That's how it's always been. That's how it'll always be." But Hammurabi wasn't buying it. During his youth, he'd secretly mix with common people, listening to their problems. What he saw was shocking. If a rich merchant got a slave girl pregnant, no consequences. If a powerful noble killed a poor person, just pay a fine. Women were bought and sold like property. Children were considered their father's possessions. The most shocking incident happened a year before he became king. A young woman fled to the palace, escaping her wealthy husband's violence. Her body was bruised, her eye swollen. Hammurabi wanted to help her, but his father wouldn't allow it. "We don't interfere in family matters," he said. The next day, that woman was found dead in her home. This event changed Hammurabi's life. That night he swore to himself, when he became king, he'd never turn a blind eye to oppression. But how? How could he change thousands of years of tradition? He'd find his answer in his first year as king. His first decision as king was shocking. He cancelled all debts. This indurarum system freed thousands of poor people from debt slavery. But this was just the beginning. Hammurabi wouldn't settle for temporary fixes. For permanent change, he needed a completely new system. Right here, he made the most important decision in human history, the first comprehensive written legal system. But this system wouldn't just punish criminals, it would transform society's entire structure. Rich, poor, powerful, weak, male, female, a system that covered and protected everyone. The biggest problem Hammurabi faced was legitimacy. How could he change traditions that had lasted thousands of years? Why should people accept his rules? He found his answer in the smartest political move of his era: divine authority. But this wasn't just propaganda. Back then, people genuinely believed gods ruled the world. And Hammurabi masterfully used this belief. Choosing Shamash, the god of justice, was strategic genius. Because Shamash wasn't just Babylon's god, he was all of Mesopotamia's god. The top of the famous Hammurabi stela shows this scene. Shamash sits on his golden throne, extending the rod of justice and ring symbols to Hammurabi. This scene wasn't just artistic mush, it carried deep political meaning. By proving his authority came from the gods, Hammurabi guaranteed no one could question his laws. The divine authority story went like this. Hammurabi had retreated to the temple and prayed for days. God Shamash appeared to him in a dream and said, "My son Hammurabi, I have chosen you to bring justice to the world. People are crushed under oppression, the powerful exploit the weak. You will change this order. I give you this rod symbolizing justice. Judge everyone equally with it." This story went completely unquestioned at the time, because Hammurabi's lifestyle supported this divine choice. Unlike other kings who indulged in palace pleasures, he listened to his people's problems. Every morning he'd open the palace gates to the public, personally hearing complaints. These behaviors made the divine choice believable. But Hammurabi's truly clever move was sharing this divine authority with the people. Laws no longer depended on the king's whims, but on divine will. This meant both ruler and ruled had to follow the same rules. For the first time, both governor and governed were subject to the same laws. This concept would change world history. Roman emperors would declare themselves God's shadows. Medieval kings would claim to be God's representatives on earth. Even modern dictators would use similar tactics. They all trace back to Hammurabi. The divine authority system also laid the foundation for judicial independence. Hammurabi told judges, "You serve Shamash, not me. When dispensing justice, think only of God, not the king." This approach was the first example of modern judicial system's independence principle. But most importantly, this system democratized justice. Justice was no longer dispensed behind palace doors but in city squares. Judges were appointed in every neighborhood, making justice accessible to everyone. This was one of humanity's greatest revolutions. Hammurabi's laws consisted of 282 articles total. But this wasn't just a list, it was a comprehensive life guide. Each article was inspired by real events and carefully thought out. When we categorize these laws, we see just how visionary Hammurabi was: property rights and land organization. For the first time, private property was clearly defined. Article 6, if an Awilum steals God's or palace property, that man shall be executed. Also, whoever receives goods from him shall be executed. This law emphasized the sanctity of public property. Article 8 was even more revolutionary. If an Awilum steals ox, sheep, donkey, pig, or goat, if they belong to God or palace, he pays 30-fold. If they belong to Mushkanam, he pays 10-fold. If the thief has nothing to pay, he shall be executed. This proportional punishment system formed the foundation of modern law. Most surprising was that property rights were granted to all social classes. Even slaves had personal belongings that were protected. Article 15. If an Awilum takes a palace slave or Mushkanam slave out of the city, he shall be executed. Slave kidnapping was one of the most serious crimes. Commercial law and economic regulations. Hammurabi laid all the foundations of modern commercial law. Article 100. The Shamalu trade representative takes silver from the Tamkaram merchant and goes on a trading journey. Where he goes, he increases his profit. This article was the first example of modern banking. Article 102 regulated interest rates. If Tamkaram gives silver to Shamalu, and he suffers loss on the road, he returns the principal of that silver to Tamkaram. The principle of risk sharing was established 4,000 years ago. Article 104 was amazing. If Tamkaram gives grain, oil, wool, or any goods to Shamalu for trade, Shamalu counts the silver and gives it sealed to Tamkaram. He calculates the silver he received on the road. The first written contract system. Most revolutionary were consumer protection laws. Article 108. If a female wine seller does not accept grain for drink or gives less drink than the silver weight, if proven, she shall be thrown into water. This was the first example of consumer rights law. Family law and social order. Here Hammurabi was truly revolutionary. Article 128. If an Awilam takes a wife but does not make a contract with her, that woman is not his wife. Marriage was now done by mutual agreement. Article 129 regulated adultery. If an Awilam's wife is caught lying with another man, they shall bind both and throw them into water. But if the husband forgives his wife, the king also forgives his slave. This article granted the right to forgiveness. Article 138 defined divorce rights. If an Awilam wants to abandon his wife who bears no children, he shall give her silver equal to her bride price and return the dowry her father gave, then he may abandon her. Women were financially secured in divorce. Criminal law and justice system. Here comes the famous eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth principle. Article 196. If an Awilam destroys an Awilam's eye, his eye shall be destroyed. This wasn't just revenge, it was a proportional justice system. Article 197. If he breaks an Awilam's bones, his bones shall be broken. Punishment was completely proportional to the crime. Article 200. If an Awilam knocks out an Awilam's tooth, his tooth shall be knocked out. Every punishment was proportional to the crime committed. But this system also considered social class differences. Article 198. If an Awilam destroys a Mushkanam's eye or breaks his bones, he pays 1 mina silver. Article 199. If he destroys an Awilam's slave's eye or breaks his bones, he pays half the slave's value. We might call these articles unjust, but they were revolutionary for their time. Because before, no one who harmed a slave received any punishment, the most brutal punishments. Article 218. If a physician operates on an Awilam with a bronze knife for a severe wound and causes death, the physician's hands shall be cut off. This might seem harsh, but medicine was a serious profession back then. Article 229. If a builder builds a house for an Awilam and does not make his work solid, and the house collapses and kills the owner, that builder shall be executed. This law improved construction quality so much that Babylon's buildings stood for 1,000 years. The most shocking aspect of Hammurabi's laws was their brutal punishments. But behind this brutality was a deep philosophy: deterrence. If punishments were severe enough, no one would dare commit crimes. And this system worked surprisingly well. One morning, a crowd gathered in Babylon's main square. A young physician was being tried for killing his patient. The man had operated on an elderly merchant, but the patient died from infection. According to Article 218, the physician's hands would be cut off. But the court process was surprising. The physician could defend himself: "I did my best. The patient was very old, and his illness was severe." Witnesses were heard. Other physicians gave opinions. Finally, the decision was made. The physician had indeed been negligent. The punishment was carried out that afternoon. The physician was brought to the square, and his hands were cut with a bronze knife capable of cutting hands. But surprisingly, the execution was done compassionately. Wounds were immediately bandaged. Anesthetics were given so the physician wouldn't faint. This brutal punishment had shown its deterrent effect. The difficulty of being a physician in Babylon was known, and physicians worked very carefully. Result: Babylon had the best hospitals in Mesopotamia. Article 229 created even more shocking implementation examples. An architect had built a house for a wealthy family. The house collapsed in an earthquake, and the family father died. The architect was held responsible for negligent construction and executed. But the story's continuation was surprising. The architect's family received compensation, and so did the dead man's family. Thanks to this system, Babylon's buildings became the sturdiest structures of their time, because no architect wanted to risk his life. The most controversial laws dealt with witchcraft. Article 2. If an Awilam accuses another of sorcery but cannot prove it, the accused shall go to the river and dive into the water. If the river takes him, the accuser takes his house. If the river cleanses him and he survives, the accuser shall be executed. According to this logic, the gods would protect the innocent. The system worked like this. The accused person was thrown into the river. If they could swim, they survived and were considered innocent. But if they couldn't swim, they drowned and were considered guilty. This system might seem unjust, but it prevented false accusations at the time. Because the person making false accusations also faced the risk of death. No one easily made accusations of witchcraft. One day a young woman accused her neighbor of witchcraft. The woman had lost her baby and claimed her neighbor had cast a spell. The neighbor was thrown into the river but swam out. The accusing woman was executed. After this incident, witchcraft accusations almost completely stopped. One of the most brutal punishments was given to child kidnappers. Article 14. If an Awilum kidnaps a young child, he shall be executed. No pardons, no reductions. This law protected children so well that child kidnapping cases almost completely disappeared. But Hammurabi's clever side was balancing these harsh punishments. There were also laws protecting innocence. Article 3. If an Awilum gives false testimony in court and cannot prove his words, if the case requires death penalty, that man shall be executed. False testimony was one of the most serious crimes. Article 5 prevented judicial corruption. If a judge tries a case, makes a decision, issues a sealed document, then changes his decision, that judge shall be found guilty of changing the decision and pay 12 times the case penalty, be removed from the judgment seat, and never judge again. This law guaranteed judicial independence. Judges couldn't be pressured by anyone, including the king. Hammurabi's most surprising aspect was his revolutionary approach to women's rights. 4,000 years ago, in a world that saw women only as property, Hammurabi granted them incredible rights. These rights were so advanced that some weren't recognized in modern countries until the 20th century. Article 141 was completely groundbreaking. If an Awilum's wife humiliates her husband and says, "You cannot lie with me," the matter shall be investigated. If the woman is careful and faultless, and her husband goes about and humiliates her greatly, that woman is not guilty. She may take her dowry and go to her father's house. This law granted women divorce rights 4,000 years ago. Moreover, if the woman was right, she could also receive financial compensation. This right didn't exist in some European countries even in the 19th century. Article 142 was even more revolutionary. If a woman hates her husband and says, "You cannot lie with me," the neighborhood shall investigate. If the woman is careful and faultless and her husband neglects and humiliates her greatly, the woman is considered innocent. She may take her dowry and go to her father's house. Records exist of this law's implementation. A young woman complained about her old alcoholic husband. The neighborhood investigated. They found the woman was clean, hard-working, and faithful, while the man came home drunk every night and beat his wife. The woman divorced and received compensation. Female merchants were also protected. Article 109. If bad characters gather at a female wine seller's place and she doesn't arrest them, that female wine seller shall be executed. This law actually protected female business owners, because the woman had to be able to control her workplace. Article 110 was even more protective. If a Nadatu or Ugbabtu priestess classes opens a wine house or enters a wine house for drink, that woman shall be burned. This law protected the dignity of religious women. Widows were under special protection. Article 177. If a widow does not accept men who want to enter her house, no one can force her. This law protected widows from remarriage pressure. Article 178 regulated inheritance rights. If a Nadatu, Ugbabtu, or Sekretu priestess receives field, garden, or house from her father with a sealed document, after her brother's death, her brothers cannot take it from her. Women could inherit. One of the most revolutionary laws was Article 134. If an Awilum is captured and there is no food in his house, his wife may enter another house. That woman is considered innocent. In war situations, women could remarry. Article 135 continued. If an Awilum is captured and there is no food in his house, his wife enters another house and bears children. When that man returns, he may take back his wife. the children follow their father. Even child custody was regulated. Pregnant women were under special protection. Article 209. If an Awilam strikes an Awilam's daughter and causes miscarriage, he pays 10 shekels silver for that miscarriage. Article 210. If that woman dies, his daughter shall be executed. These laws protected pregnant women from violence. Most surprising was that women could be judges. Some records mention female judges. This was incredible progress for that time. Female judges began appearing in modern countries in the 20th century, but Hammurabi allowed this 4,000 years ago. Even the concubine system was regulated. Article 144. If an Awilam marries a Nadato and that Nadato gives him a concubine, if that concubine bears children, then considers herself equal to her mistress cannot sell her as a slave, but may mark her with the slave mark and count her among slaves. This system might seem strange, but it protected women at the time, because the concubine also had rights, and the main wife couldn't punish her arbitrarily. Hammurabi also protected children's rights in a pioneering way. While children were considered their father's absolute property at the time, Hammurabi issued laws protecting children. Article 195. If a son strikes his father, his hands shall be cut off. This might seem harsh, but it actually protected the child from being killed. Because before, a father could kill his rebellious child. Articles 168, 169 were even more protective. If a father wants to disinherit his son, he must go to court and say, "I disinherit my son." The court investigates the reason. If the son committed a serious offense, the father forgives the first time. On the second serious offense, he may disinherit. This law was revolutionary. Fathers could no longer arbitrarily disinherit their children. Just cause and a court decision were required. This protected children from fathers' whims. The adoption system was regulated in detail. Article 185. If an Awilam takes a young child for sonship and raises him, that raised child cannot be reclaimed. Giving up for adoption was irreversible. Article 186. If an Awilam takes a young child for sonship and when he takes him, that child seeks his father and mother, that raised child returns to his birth home. The child's wishes mattered. Article 189. If he doesn't teach him a trade, that raised child returns to his birth home. The adopter had to teach the child a profession. Article 190. If an Awilam doesn't count the child he took for sonship among his sons but raises him, that raised child returns to his birth home. Equal treatment was mandatory. Article 192 was shocking. If the raised child of an artisan or prostitute says to his adoptive father, "You are not my father," or to his adoptive mother, "You are not my mother," his tongue shall be cut out. This harsh punishment protected the adoption system. Orphan children were under special protection. Hammurabi made caring for orphan children a state duty. Every neighborhood had orphan officials, and these people were personally responsible for the children's care. Article 170. If an Awilam's wife bears him children and his concubine also bears him children, if the father says "my children's" to the concubine's children during his lifetime, he counts the concubine's children with the wife's children. For the first time, children born out of wedlock also gained inheritance rights. One of the most revolutionary laws was Article 137. If an Awilam wants to abandon a concubine who bore children, or a Nadi too who bore children, he returns her dowry and gives her field, garden and property to raise her children. Single mother children were also protected. Hammurabi's laws were the world's first comprehensive commercial law. All foundations of the modern economy were laid here. Article 100. The Shamoli takes silver from the Temkaram and goes on a trading journey. Where he goes, he increases the silver and returns it to Temkaram. This was the first example of the modern banking system. Article 101. If he cannot profit where he goes, the Shamoli pays twice the silver he took to Temkaram. The risk-return balance was determined by law. Article 102. If Temkaram gives silver to Shamoli and he suffers loss on the road, he returns the principal of that silver to Temkaram. The foundation of insurance was laid. Interest rates were regulated in detail. 33% annually for grain, 20% for silver could be charged. These rates seem high, but 300% interest rates were normal at the time. Article 122 Trust System. If an Awilum entrusts silver, gold, or anything to an Awilum and shows him witnesses or makes a contract, then denies it, he proves that case and pays twice what he denied. Article 123. If he entrusts without showing witnesses or making a contract and the place where he entrusted denies it, that case is invalid. For the first time, commercial transactions were being put in writing. Article 125 Theft. If an Awilum entrusts his property, and at the place where he entrusted, his property disappears with the house owner's property by theft, the house owner finds everything lost, makes the thief pay, and gives to the one who entrusted. This law laid the foundation of modern insurance. The person receiving the trust was responsible for the goods' security. Consumer rights were surprisingly protected. Article 108. If a female wine seller does not accept grain for drink or gives less drink than the silver weight, if proven, she shall be thrown into water. This law was the first example of quality control systems. Consumers couldn't be deceived. Even the tax system was fair. The rich paid more, the poor paid less tax. Article 40. A Awilum may sell field, garden, house. The buyer pays the tax. Even the tax system for property transfers was regulated. Trade route security was ensured. Article 103. If the enemy captures him on the road, Shamalu swears to the gods that he lost everything he took and is freed. There was protection against war risks. After Hammurabi's death, his laws continued to be applied for another 1,500 years. Assyrian kings, Babylonian kings, even Persian kings based their systems on these laws. These laws were so effective, they spread throughout the Near East. Even Roman law was influenced by Hammurabi. The Roman legal collection Corpus Juris Civilis contains articles similar to Hammurabi's laws. The principle of proportional punishment came from Rome to the present day. But what's truly amazing is these laws' impact on religious texts. The eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth principle in the Old Testament was taken directly from Hammurabi. Moses' laws show incredible similarity to Hammurabi's laws. Even the 10 Commandments in the Torah were influenced by Hammurabi. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witness. Thou shalt not kill. All of these exist in Hammurabi's laws. Modern constitutions are Hammurabi's legacy. The principle of equality before the law in the U.S. Constitution is a continuation of the system Hammurabi brought 4,000 years ago. The right to fair trial in the European Convention on Human Rights was born in Hammurabi's time. Hammurabi's greatest legacy was democratizing justice. Justice no longer depended on the king's whims but on written rules. This revolution was one of humanity's greatest achievements. The scales of justice in today's courtrooms come from Hammurabi's time. Defense techniques used by modern lawyers were developed in Babylon 4,000 years ago. Basic principles taught in law schools are written on Hammurabi's stone stelas. 4,000 years later, we still walk in his footsteps. Because Hammurabi was the first leader to teach justice to humanity. He wasn't just a king but also a teacher, philosopher, and visionary. The system he established was so perfect it wasn't changed for thousands of years. And most importantly, Hammurabi taught us this: justice comes not from power but from right. Oppression is temporary. Justice is eternal. This legacy will live forever.